Hi, Only. I am so excited that you are back on the Author Revolution podcast. The last time you were here was, oh gosh, it feels like a year ago. I don't think it was quite that, but it was quite a bit. And we were talking about your success on TikTok and for you as an author. And we happened to touch on the subject of Patreon. Well, I've had my audience asking me questions about Patreon, and you are one of the people I know who is like so successful when it comes to having your Patreon running. You have over 1,400 patrons and you're earning over $14,000 a month just on Patreon alone. So
Yeah.
I think you're kind of an expert in this field at this point.
I think
So
I am now.
yeah, you totally are. So how long have you been running your Patreon to get yourself to this point?
I started Patreon, I want to say maybe 2020 or 2021, like right
Okay.
around there. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, and for a long time, I didn't have a lot of subscribers. I think when Necessary Evils took off, I maybe had 35 subscribers,
Okay. Yeah.
loyal subscribers, but
Yeah.
that was it. But I wasn't really offering too much. It was mostly just like read as I write, that kind of thing. Like I would occasionally throw up like a little mini fic, or I would throw up some um, artwork or something if I had it. I would let people have access to cover reveals, blurb reveals, stuff like that. But I really hadn't found like the niche of like what people really were looking for at that point. So there wasn't a whole lot of like exponential growth as far as like seeing my list kind of expand until Necessary Evil started. And then I had a lot more I could offer people in terms of like content, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Did that clicking together with Necessary Evils, did that help you then to create a better niche content creation like calendar? Did that
Yes,
help at all?
it was,
Yeah.
I wasn't really as, um, I wasn't as committed to Patreon as I should have been in the beginning. Like, if I could go over, do it all over again, I would have had content ready to go before I started Patreon so that people not only had stuff immediately when they signed up to my Patreon that they could access, but I would have, um, like had stuff ready to go and that I wouldn't every week have to be worrying about what's going up that week. I would have stuff like I would be working a month ahead essentially. Like, um, so in that aspect, I wish I could kind of go back and do it again. I also would realize that everything is content. Everything is content.
Yeah.
Like I have put up stickies of like me trying to draw out sex configurations between four people, like little stick figure drawings on a sticky note, and people went crazy over it. Like everything is content. Like don't
Yeah.
throw away extended scenes. Don't throw away scenes that don't make it into the book. Don't disregard anything. If you wrote it, if you made it, somebody will probably want to see it, even if it's in the rawest form. People like having that behind the scenes access, and the more you give them, the more they get hungry for it. Even if it's not like what they signed up for, even if they signed up for the work in progress or they signed up just for the minific, like the more it looks like you're giving them, the more loyal they are as patrons.
Yeah, that's super cool. I think that's really an interesting side note for like social media in general too, where it's I think we as creators, we get so hung up. Either we get this idea in our heads that we're not like, no one's going to care about that. Like newsletters are the same way, where it's like, no one's going to care what I'm doing today, or, the fact that I've had 3 cups of coffee and I'm addicted, or that I did a workout with, Jillian Michaels, or who knows, whatever it is. But yet there are people out there where that
But they
sets an
do.
example or it resonates with them
Yeah.
and they're like, oh my God, she's a person, or he's a
Yeah.
guy that like I could have bumped into on the street, and I think readers really love that.
I send out a weekly newsletter, and if I don't send out that newsletter, people yell at me. Like,
Nice.
it's true because I have a serial that I run in my newsletter, and every week they get a chapter. Well, now it's every other week they get a chapter because keeping up with 4 chapters for a whole separate story was a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so like every other newsletter is a serial chapter, but those two in between newsletters are nothing but promo for me.
Yeah.
And every time I send out a newsletter, it promos my Patreon, And every time I get 50 to 100 new subscribers,
That's
every time.
amazing. Oh my gosh. So okay, you're talking about you're using your newsletter to get people onto Patreon.
Yep.
So let's back up a little bit. If an author is new to Patreon and they're thinking about starting up, what's the first thing they should consider then? Should they start considering like the obviously the way that it gets set up, but I'd love to know your take on like the marketing side of things too and getting people onto the list. Where would someone new start?
You would want to start with making sure that everybody knows you have a Patreon in every way possible. At the bottom of every one of my newsletters, whether it's a serial one or a promo one, it always has a blurb that says, "Don't want to wait for my next book. Read it as I write it. Blah 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 blah. Want to see minifics? Want to see the spiel?"
Smart.
And then there's a
Yeah.
button that says "Join my Patreon." It's right there. It's in every single newsletter. I never have to fix it, touch it. It's just always there. My link tree has my Patreon as the second link on
Nice.
my link tree.
Okay.
Um, and I get tons and tons of hits. I would say thousands of hits on my link tree. Um, it's in the back of all of my books that there is a Patreon. Pretty much anywhere I can talk about my Patreon, I do. I
Okay.
put it on Instagram every time there's a new chapter. My social media girl makes a little graphic. She puts it on there with like a teaser for it and like, hey, this is up on Patreon now. Like, so I used to never get subscribers because I didn't want to tell people I had a Patreon because I never wanted them to think I was like scamming them out of money or I was being
Right.
greedy or whatever. I had to
Yeah.
really change my mindset about that. Like, no, this is just exclusive content I'm offering for an additional fee. This isn't like, oh, you don't get this because you don't have $5 a month or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
this
And you're
is
not
just
holding anyone
exclusive
to it
bonus
either.
content. Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's be real. If somebody really wants your content, $5 is less than they pay for a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Right. And it's only once a month. So,
And it's once a month. Like
yeah.
I spend $5 at Starbucks far more often than I care to think about it. I can subscribe to 100 Patreons for what I spend at Starbucks.
Right.
Like,
Oh my
so
goodness.
you have to kind of stop looking at it as like people are doing you a favor and
Mhm.
start just looking at it for what it is, which is an exchange of goods and services. Like you're
Yeah.
offering exclusive content and they're giving you $5 plus a month depending on what they want from you. And changing that mindset into more of a business mindset of like people can't subscribe to something they don't know exists. That helped me really like realize that there's a lot of opportunities to tell people about my Patreon that I was completely overlooking.
For sure. One of the things that I find interesting with Patreon too is that at least for me, I have a PA. She's not a fan of doing social media either. And I need to find someone probably that wants to do it. I myself am too busy to like constantly be coming up with content. And so I for this year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to pull back on my fiction side of things just to see what happens. Like, is this
Mm-hmm.
type of content creation really necessary? But what I found with Patreon is that rather than posting on, Instagram or posting on Facebook or something, or just doing a mass thing, when something inspiring comes up, I'll post it on Patreon and just make it public so that now
Yep.
that's become like my social media platform in addition to the exclusive content that they can then access.
And that's a great way to bring people to your Patreon. I know a lot of people who will put up like free first chapters of their stories on their Patreon and then put the link to their Patreon, like, want to read for chapter one of my book? You can read it over on my Patreon. I
Yeah.
know a lot of people will do almost like a radish type thing where they'll be like, the first three chapters on my Patreon are free, and then you can like pay $1 to unlock the rest of it or that sort of thing. So there's
Yeah.
always ways to drive traffic to your Patreon by even offering free content or like you do, using it almost like a social media feed so that they're constantly over there anyway. And they might get curious about what the locked content is.
Right, right. And it's been
Yeah.
a lot of fun too. I haven't seen a dip of any kind in sales or anything like that. And
Nope.
if anything, it's just been, people trickling in. It hasn't been like this mass exodus or anything, but it's been fun to interact, been more fun actually to interact with the people who are there because they're more excited and engaged.
They're much more engaged on Patreon. Like when
Yeah.
I put a chapter up, I get at least 60 to 100 people responding per chapter every time I put a new chapter up. It's like real
That's
time
amazing.
feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like I basically have 1,400 beta readers. So like
Right.
I know in real time if something isn't working or something is tripping them up or they don't understand something. Like, and I can fix that as I go. before it reaches thousands and thousands of people where I can't fix it, or I have to take it back, or they have to re-download an error. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yep.
it actually it works like in a really symbiotic way. It's kind of really cool. And I know a lot of authors were like, you give an art copy to every single one of your patrons, like, doesn't that take away from your sales? I'm like, one, they've paid for that art copy 10 times over. Like, by the time
Right.
they get an art copy, they've paid $50 for it. What are you talking about? Like, but
Yeah.
also, I put up a book, like, when Maniac released, um, on the 16th, by the 17th, I already had 600 reviews up
Wow.
on Amazon. I'm up
Yeah.
to almost 2,000 reviews, and it's March 2nd, 3rd. I don't know. Like,
Mark
and
something.
it's because right, it's because they were reading in real time. So then they get that
Yeah.
arc, they finish the story, and they immediately go and they review it on Goodreads and Amazon. So I'm getting like to have 2,000 reviews in 2 weeks is,
Yeah.
there's far more benefit for me using Patreon, like, and using it during my work in progress, then there's any drawbacks. There's definitely no drawbacks. And so many of my patrons will still go buy the book. They'll
Right?
buy it.
Right? Yeah.
They'll put it on KM, they'll read it and use the K, they'll do Kindle Unlimited and they'll read through it again. Like, so I really don't lose money in any way on Patreon. Like, there's no downside to Patreon
I
other than
haven't
the
seen a
fee.
down, yeah, I haven't seen a down, well, sure, but they
The
have to make a
fee.
living too, right?
Exactly.
But at the
That's
same time,
that's the only downside to Patreon.
yeah, it's just such a neat platform, and the way that it's evolved over the years has been really cool to watch too. I remember
Yeah.
signing up for it like I don't know, probably 2017, and it looks
Yeah.
so wildly different than it does now. So
Yeah.
it's great, and I think the way that it can be molded to the like author and to the reader is so beneficial. The readers can interact,
Yeah.
and they do interact in a way that they haven't, at least I haven't felt on social media for a long time. Like, you get a heart and
Yeah.
then they go, where if these people are reading it, they're like, oh my god, when's the next chapter coming out?
Yeah. And
It's
they get
great.
feral for it and then they tell
Yeah.
other people. Like,
Yeah.
and so it's word of mouth. And it gets your audience that isn't on Patreon excited for like when the book launches. So you have that buzz and stuff, the anticipation sort of built in to Patreon, which is awesome. And it all kind of just feeds into the rest of it. People talking about it. Like, when I put graphics up for my next book is called Paladin. Um, when I put graphics up for Paladin, people who are reading it on Patreon will rave about it in the comments, and then that gets people excited and curious, and then they'll go to Patreon and they'll be like, I don't usually read books as they're written, you know, like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm going to do it this time because I can't wait. One of my readers calls it literary edging.
I love it.
And she's like, that's what you do. You do literary edging. Like,
Love
she's
it.
like, you make everybody work for every chapter or whatever. And I'm just like, I loved that. I just thought it was such a great like saying. It's like, I've developed a new kink.
Right.
Um, but it all works together, like the whole thing has just really gelled like together really organically. Like, I didn't set out to like with any grand master plan, it's all been like trial and error and figuring out just exactly what works and how, and then kind of trying to like do that on a bigger scale, like,
Right.
and honestly, it's a lot about manifesting it. I hate saying that because I know a lot of people just roll their eyes, but like this at the beginning of the year, I was looking at my goals and I'm like, okay, so my goal is to make 16,000 a month on Patreon by the end of the year. If only $5 subscribers sign up, that means I would need like 2,200 subscribers. But I'm like, I'm not going to look at how many subscribers. I'm going to look at how much I want to make. So I'm like,
Yeah.
16,000 ish a month will bring me approximately $250,000 a year just off of Patreon, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as I wrote that out and I stuck it on my little board, all of a sudden the numbers just started going. I only had $12,000 at the beginning of January. And
Yeah.
now here I am, and it's March 1st, and I'm already up to like 14.5 ish. a month,
Yeah.
and that's just monthly. That doesn't even bring in what I make yearly every month. Like people sign up for the yearly membership, so I will get that like whole year in that month. So like
Sure.
last month I made almost $22,000 off of Patreon.
Holy cow.
Just yeah, in between monthly and yearly subscribers, you know? And the other thing I did that makes a huge difference is I cap my larger tier. So my $50 a month tier is only 50 subscribers. Well, it was. Now it's 100. Um, and I did that because one, I wanted it to be very exclusive because I do give a lot more content away at that level because I do the book boxes for the $50 tier. Um, but two, the more exclusive it feels, the more anxious people are to have it.
Sure.
And so in January, because I had capped the tier and people have been like, when are you going to open it again? When are you going to open it again? I was like, screw it. I will add another 50 openings. So it'll be 100. And then when that closes, I'll wait until next January and I'll open another 50 if it's still maxed out. And in 2 days, I had maxed out those 100 because I was like, when they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah.
And people were like, I want access to those book boxes, you know? And so like by offering just that once a year, it makes it more exclusive and it makes it more like time sensitive. So people want it. It's the same thing when I sold those book boxes. My book boxes were super expensive. They were almost $300, but
Yeah.
when I told them, like, listen, there's only 100 of them. When they're gone, they're gone. They sold out in 5 minutes, you know?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so, so I have learned that by making something time sensitive, that it really does cause this sort of like, oh, I need it now kind of thing because I might not have access to it again. Um, and I'm the same way. Like if you
Oh,
give me
sure.
like, oh, I want that, and it's like, oh, but you've only got this month. Like, I will be so anxious until it's in my hand. Like, but I didn't know if that made me the outlier or if there are other people out there like that.
I think
But
they
I
created
have
the term
learned,
FOMO for a reason. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it really is true. So like if you make it something that's something they really want, like they will pay you for the opportunity to have it.
Yeah, for sure.
And
And if you're giving them that content that makes them feel good, you know what I mean? Because it's
yeah,
exclusive, because it's fun, because it's entertaining them, and it's doing the thing that they are wanting it to do, you're hitting that market perfectly.
yeah,
Yeah. So let's talk about your tiers because you do have some amazing tiers. And I know authors when they first start out with Patreon, they kind of get stuck in that realm. It's almost like doing a Kickstarter where they're like, I don't know what to do with these things. So
yeah.
how did you come
Don't
up
get
with
me
your
started on
tier?
Kickstarter because I see
Right?
people doing Kickstarter and it just looks like it
Chaos.
looks like
It's
they're doing
chaos.
hieroglyphics. I'm like, I don't understand any of it.
So how would you recommend or how did you come about creating your tiers so that you knew what people were really looking for and how to break them down in a way that made them either want to do the next level or
So I kind of looked at it from the beginning, like I sort of modeled it in the very beginning after another author friend of mine, Nora Phoenix, because she had been doing good on Patreon, and her tiers seemed to make sense. It was like the $5 tier got like one work in progress chapter a week. They got access to like the mini fix, and they got access to like cover and blurb reveal type things. And then the next tier up, which was, I don't remember what hers was, but I went to with $10. They got up to 3 chapters of the work in progress a week and that sort of thing. So, in addition to what you get in the $5 tier. And so for a
right.
long time, I only had like 5, 10, and then I think I had like a $20 tier. And the $20 tier really was more about like upgraded merch and you got like a signed paperback. Um, and that was fine when I really didn't have a whole lot of Patreon, like involvement so it did okay. It wasn't until like I really started to see a lot more movement on Patreon that I was like, okay, these tiers, like they're all right, but they're not really working for me for what I wanted for them.
Hmm.
So that's when I really started looking into the merch options that Patreon had because I was like, I can send out books easily, right? I can send out hardcovers or paperbacks or whatever easily. That's not a problem. But I can't create my own like in-home merch store. And there was no way to merge that my other merch shop with Patreon. There just wasn't a way to do it cohesively and easily. So I
Right.
was like, I'll let Patreon do my exclusive merch for Patreon, and I will keep Printful slash my merch store on my website separately. That way, I don't have to worry about who's owed what when, because Patreon handles that. They know every 3 months somebody's due something, and that's their problem, not mine. Because if
Yep.
I have to keep up with who gets what when, they're never getting it, because that's just who I am as a person. Like
But at least you know that.
my
That's good.
ADHD, like between my autism and my ADHD, they're never getting it. It's never happening. My object permanence issue will make everybody very sad. Um, so I looked into Patreon's options for merch, and I was like, my lower tiers, my $5 and $10 tiers, they get like mini prints, they get stickers, stuff like that. That's all like still merch that they want. It's just on a smaller scale.
Yep.
Um, and then the only real difference between my $10 and my $20 tier is that the $20 tier gets elevated merch. So they get posters, they get mugs, they get t-shirts. So a little bit higher quality, a little bit like bigger items. But still all the other stuff stays the same.
Hmm.
So it's that's really the only difference between the $20 and the $10 tier. But it doesn't matter because they still sign up for it. They want that elevated merch, so they will still take
Yeah.
the $20 over the 10. And then the $25 tier, they get a paperback every time I launch a book. So they get a signed paperback, and that goes to them once the book, is live. And then for a while, the $50 tier got a signed hardcover. But now what I do is instead, when a series ends, they get the exclusive book box with all of the special edition covers signed, a bunch of artwork that is only for the book box, and then like certain exclusive artwork by Heidi, who does all the really nice artwork in my merch store. She does exclusive stuff just for the book box. So there's like, it's basically like a book box you would see from like Fairy Loot or one of those sort of things, but it's all exclusive to my books and that specific series.
Cool.
So now that's what happens like for the $50 tier. They just have to kind of wait a little bit longer for it, but then they get that exclusive access for free when other people pay almost $300 for it. So
That's awesome. So do you create exclusive covers just for Patreon, or are the exclusive covers for other reasons as well?
no, they'll still be available, and that's what I told people. Like everything, like all of the exclusive special edition cover books will be available in my merch shop. Like they'll
Okay.
still be able to buy all of the books, but the artwork, they'll never be able to have that. The bookmarks, they'll never have that. All of the stuff that's exclusive artwork and stuff for the book boxes will only go to patrons and the
Okay.
people who got access to those book boxes. But all of the other stuff they can still buy in the store, because I'm not trying to make it to where it's like something that they'll never have access to, but like,
Sure.
for that money they pay every month, they should have access to some stuff that nobody else will ever have. So like some of that is exclusive to those books.
That is really cool. I love that a lot. I've been thinking, like, how do you go about doing your exclusive covers? Do you have a printer that you work with, or is it like something that you design through Ingram Spark or something like that, and it just happens to be an exclusive?
Um, for Necessary Evils, Molly, I have a cover designer on staff, so she made the artwork and everything for the book boxes, and these are being done through Ingram. Now, Obsidian Flame Crate, they're doing an only book box, like an exclusive one with just my next book coming out, Paladin. Um, and they have all kinds of stuff that they're doing. And they have a printer that exclusively does like really fancy covers. They do like the sprayed edges. Like they have access to people who do like the foiling on the top. So going forward for Paladin, and those boxes for Jericho's Voice, those might have a little bit more upgraded elements to them because I'm working with Rachel and them over there and Taylor, and they're kind of helping me find like the right printers in China and places like that where they're willing to do like, fancier things that I didn't have access to for Necessary Evils. But the covers for Necessary Evils are badass anyway. Like they were really cool. She did such a great job. The covers underneath the dust jackets are so cool. So there's still a lot of really good stuff, but this was all done in house versus probably the future ones will be done with some outside printers.
Gotcha. That's really cool though. It's nice to see like what the options are too, because authors are often
Yeah,
like they'll look at it and go, I want to do that, but I could never do that. And yet you
right.
can.
And
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that was the nice thing about like having Rachel and Taylor is they're like, no, no, this is what we do for a living. So we know all of the people. So having them as an asset is really helpful. And they've been so sweet about sharing research and stuff like that. So I'm lucky in that I tend to just meet the right people at the right time and go from there.
That's because you're having fun and manifesting, obviously.
That's right. I really am. I really am. Like people look
Yeah.
at me like I'm insane, but I'm just like, no, like seriously, like I made it happen. And I tell everybody, like I had a 9 hour physical on Tuesday. So I was literally in the doctor's office from
Oh,
9:30 in the morning until late at night, going from CT scans to like nutritionist to doctor, like for like just everything. I was all over that hospital. And everywhere I go, people say the same thing. What do you do? Because I'm doing an executive health physical, and I don't look like any executive any of them have ever seen. I'm covered in tattoos, like, and they all look at me and they're just like, and I'm like, I write romance novels. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I write romance novels, gay romance novels about psychopaths. And they're just like, can I get your name? Like,
yeah.
everybody wants to, like, I'm like, okay, but just know, like, what you're getting into. But, like, people will say, like, how did you make all this money? Like, writing about gay psychopaths falling in love. And I'm like, yeah, because I made it happen. And like everybody just wants to hear more. Like I get asked so many times to like tell my story, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's a simple story. Like I just decided it was mine and it is. Like
I love that you just said that because I say that all the time on the podcast and anywhere where people will listen. Deciding is your superpower. You just need to make the
it
decision. I
is.
love that.
You have to just say that it's yours and like that you're ready for it because, you know, the universe
Yes.
provides it's a cheat code, but you have to actually know how to like use it.
Yep. And you do that by deciding. I love it. It's so
Yeah.
cool. So when it comes back, going back to Patreon here, when it
Yeah.
comes to Patreon, have you gotten any like surprising feedback from your audience? Anything where you're like, huh, I did not expect that.
I get a lot of feedback in that like some people will say, um, I really didn't see this character doing something like that. That's really interesting. Like, um, is it because of XYZ? Like, I know, like, they'll ask me for a further explanation, and they'll be way more on the money than I was when I did it because, it's like, they always say, like, oh, why do you think the author wrote the curtains were blue? And the author's like, because I just wanted blue curtains. And everybody's like, oh, it was a manifestation of how the character felt that. And it's like it never is that, at least not like
Right.
consciously, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's like a lot of times people will put connections to my books that I never connected, like the dots never connected for me, but that's why I did something. But like they'll pick
Sure.
up on these like very subtle things and they'll be like, oh, that was an Easter egg, right? Or no, I'm just be like, sure,
It totally
yeah,
was.
totally, I meant to do that. Like I've killed off the same character in my book twice now, and nobody's picked up on it. Uh, name it all, and name it all, and they just didn't pick up on it. Which I don't know. Like I'm a mess, and people always think it's by design, and I'm just like, okay. Um, but yeah, like I get a lot of feedback in that respect. Sometimes I get some nasty comments. Or especially when I put up the one fic about, well, two, about like the foursome, the two couples being together um in a relationship, but also like sexually, obviously. Um,
Yep.
I get a lot of harsh feedback about that because it's either them saying your characters would never do that. I'm like, they're my characters. Or yeah, they would.
Yeah.
Or just like you've ruined the whole idea of this, or you've ruined that. um I've had people send me emails saying that. um
Oh my goodness. But
yeah,
the
no,
fact that you tap into that, that's great because you're spurring on like something visceral.
right,
That's awesome.
I'm making them mad, which means they cared
Yeah.
enough to get mad in the first place. And I had to kind of start looking at it that way. I had to kind of be like, okay, well, at least they cared enough to be mad. Um but I also now put a huge disclaimer in front of any of those chapters on Patreon saying, this is a fic with these four characters in sexual situations. If you do not like it, keep scrolling. Don't leave me nasty comments because you read it and were mad that you read it. Just don't read it and be happy and scroll on. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
I had to be like, I don't want to hear your negative feedback anymore, like about it. I heard
Yeah.
it, duly noted. I'm going to do it anyway. But there's far more people who want it than the people who don't. So I'm going to
Sure.
give the thousands of people who want it, over the three or four that don't. Like, you just have to look at it that way. So it's sometimes hit or miss, because like I said, you never know what comments you're going to get at the bottom of the screen. Like, you're kind of like,
Yeah,
ooh, you know, um, but totally worth it anyway. And sometimes I get a little hurt about certain things people say, but then I'll think about it and I'll be like, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'll like go back and I'll kind of like recalibrate like to
yeah,
what I was thinking. But other times I have to be like, that's one person's opinion in a sea of thousands, and they're entitled to that opinion, and I'm entitled to ignore it.
for sure. Is there anything
So
in specific that you found your audience really loves you to do on Patreon? Like you doing your minifics or doing your artwork? Like, is there something that you do that they're like,
the
oh my God,
mini
this is the
fics
best?
are by far the biggest draw. If
Okay.
I will put up, I put up mini fics, um, especially if it's something that people say all the time, like, oh, I really wanted to see, like I had one of my MCs like was with a girl before he found the guy he ended up married to, and his ex-girlfriend was a real bitch, and everybody was just like, they called her the ice queen and all this stuff, and they wanted to see a mini fic of what happens when Jericho, his new husband, and her came face to face with each other in a situation. So I was
Okay.
like, okay. So I wrote that out and then I just threw it up there on Patreon. And I was like, hey, that fic you all were hoping for, well, it's there for $5 if you want it. And
Yeah.
a bunch of people signed up. Like, and that was how I came up with the whole foursome thing, because everybody kept saying, like, oh, they would be so great together. Like, it makes sense that the four of them would all just end up together in this kind of like polycule type thing. Like, it makes sense. And it made sense to me too. But when I had kind of brought it up before, it got so much pushback that I was like, well, I'm never going to put that in the main series because it will take it from mainstream to kink, and then I might lose my audience. And I don't
Sure.
really want to do that because I've somehow managed to ride this weird line of like psychopaths, but not so dark that it's not mainstream.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't want to lose that to like something that came out as being too kinky. So I was like, screw it. I'll put up one test fic, and if it does well, then I might do more. And if it doesn't, whatever. No harm, no foul. And I put it up and I got 300 subscribers in a day.
Holy cow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. 300 subscribers in one day off of one 3,000 minific that took me literally 2 hours to write.
I was just gonna ask, like,
Like,
how big are these minifics? Okay. So 3,000 words.
tiny, tiny, 3,000 words, maybe.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
maybe. And it's just knowing what it is that the audience wants, and they'll tell you.
Oh,
If you
sure.
poll your audience, they'll tell you what they want to see. They'll tell you the couples they want to read about. They'll tell you the scenarios they want you to write. Like, they will give you everything you need to
I
write
love
what you
that.
need. You just have to actually have the time to do it. It's kind of like writing fanfic for your audience. Like,
Sure.
it's really what it boils down to. And like, why not let people pay you to write what they want you to write? Like,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Oh, that's super cool. One of the things that I have not done, I think it's just because like I do so many different things that I'm like, oh, adding one more thing sounds like work. But when you put it like that, where it's just 3,000 words, it's like, oh, shoot, I could do that, like you said, in 2 hours and
yeah.
then be done with it. It's like, that's a
And there's
chapter.
no
It's, yeah,
mindset to it because
yeah,
they're telling you what they want you to write.
right,
You've got the characters, you've got the scenario, you just have to put it on the page,
right.
in the way that you do. And that's what they want, is they want your voice, you know?
Right. That's
And just
super cool.
giving them the scene that they wish they had gotten to read,
That is really cool. I like that idea a lot. Maybe I'll have to start incorporating some of those at some point down the line. That's interesting. Now I got to pull my audience. Thanks, Only.
Yeah. No, it's the biggest help. Sometimes though they give me too many options and I'm like, oh God. Like I'll have
Then
like
you write it on a
140
list.
story ideas and I'm like, what do I it's too many. Now I have more work to do because now I have to decide which one is the best.
Right. Right. Now it's like, well, that's okay. I've got a spreadsheet and I'm set for the next 3 years. It's great.
Exactly. Sorry, you're never getting another poll, guys, until I run out of ideas for this one.
Right.
Sorry.
Oh, that's so smart. So what about new or not, we've talked about new authors, but what about authors who are already on Patreon who are trying to make it work, but they're not quite sure how to, I don't know, I guess bridge the gap between where they're at and where they want to be with Patreon. Do you have any advice for those people? Because they're a little bit different, I feel like.
Yes, they're definitely different. The nice thing about being an author who is established is that you have an audience. You have what every newbie author wishes they had, which is like an audience. So you need to be using your newsletter, you need to be using your social media to let people know that you have a Patreon and to even ask them like, hey, what do you want to see on my Patreon? What would be enticing enough for you to be out $5 every month to go to my Patreon, And some people are just like, oh, I never spend $5, but it's a lie. It's a lie because if you make something interesting enough, I see people say it all the time. Oh, I hate Patreon, but I subscribe to yours because and people
Yep.
say it all the time, oh, Only's Patreon is so worth the $5 or $10 or whatever. Like, because I'm constantly putting up content. And if you're
Yep.
constantly feeding them, they never feel like it's a waste of their money. Like,
Right.
if they know, even if you only put up twice a week, as long as you consistently put something up twice a week, they're getting what they paid for. And that's all that really matters. Um, so with an established audience, it's one, a matter of figuring out what they want from you. Is there two characters that they're constantly asking for? Is there always like, oh, like these two characters, like I really wish they had hooked up in this story, or I wish I could have seen them do X, or like I want more about them, like what happened to them after they got together, like I want to see a day in the life of like what they do. I use it for like basically beta testing characters. Like I have the Watch coming out. It's like a whole series of basically it's like a school for assassins. Um, so originally it was going to be like the students falling in love with like the teacher kind of thing. But then I had these two characters that showed up in the first chapter of the first book, and everybody was like, "Who are they?" And I'm like, "Those guys, there's a nobody. They're just throwaway characters." And they're like, "No, no, we want their story." So like just for the hell of it, I put up like a little minific on Patreon of the two of them like having sort of like a I don't know, like a hookup in the parking lot, like even though they hate each other of this bar. And I threw it up on Patreon and I was like waiting to see the reaction. And they're like, yeah, no, we need that book. We need that book. And it reshaped how I'm going to do the whole series because now I'm like, I don't really want to tie myself to the idea of like the student teacher thing. Like, why can't it be two students? Why can't it be like the two teachers? Why can I
Yeah.
just like I don't want to lock myself in. And now because I have that real time feedback, I know that there's an interest in them just, you know, as two students or whatever, however you wanted to, do that. So you can always do that too. Like if somebody like if something is kind of brewing and you're like, is it worth putting my time and effort into? You can always do something like that. Throw out a first chapter or, an outline or anything and just be like, what do you think about that? Is that intriguing to you? And they will tell you, like, yes, absolutely, or nah, not my thing. Like, or, and I never would have put those two together because one of them is an asshole, like an absolute jerk. And I was like, he's such a jerk. He's not even remotely redeemable in that he's a jerk. And the other one is so nice. And they're like, no, no, that's our kryptonite. Like, no, no, we need you to
It's like the new Grumpy Sunshine
make
thing
that
going
guy
on.
suffer
Yeah.
and like like put him in his place. Like, and I was like, okay, okay, I can do that. So like it's a matter of like really kind of gleaning deep down like what is the like T. Taylor and her like, what's the butter, like
Yep.
your
Yep.
universal butter. Like you want to
Or
find out
ghee.
what it is
The
exactly.
ghee.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the ghee. Like you want to find out, like, into your audience, what is that butter? Like, what is it that's worth it to them to go to your Patreon and pay you $5? And I always look at it the $5 tier because, like, to me, if I have 10,000 people at the $5 level, that's still $6,000. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
every everything is like there's nobody who's not valuable to you on Patreon. Like
Yeah.
even people who look at your free content, if they're interacting with you, they're valuable, to you. They're your audience, so I just kind of look at it that way. And with your being an established author, you just have so much more opportunities if you ask for them. If you ask for them. Like if you act like people are doing you a favor by looking at your Patreon or whatever, they're going to see it as them doing you a favor, where you have to be like, hey, did you know that, like, I have all of this over here that you, like, could look at anytime you wanted to, like,
Yeah.
um and I reuse so much content. For a for Lunatic, I needed to hit a certain pre-order goal for myself, for just my own personal ego. um
Sure.
and,
It's good to
and
have goals.
so yeah, and I was like, I'm not hitting this goal and I still have 3 weeks. And so my business partner was like, why don't you bundle the mini fix that you have for Necessary Evils from Patreon and offer that as a pre-order bonus to people who pre-order in advance and show you that they pre-ordered.
Nice.
And that's what we did. And I hit my bonus. I smashed my bonus. Um, so it's it's all about, like, working smarter, not harder. Like, and like I said, everything is content. Like if you wrote a chapter and it didn't make it into the book because it just didn't flow, put it up on Patreon. Like if
Yeah.
you had a story idea and you were just like riffing and you were just like, you know what? Like I don't know if it's anything or not. Be like, hey guys, this is what I spent my night doing. Do you think it's worth it or not? Like anything is content because they're always so interested in what the process is that you're doing. So I always have to think of it that way. Even if I, like, really anything. Like I said, that stupid sticky. Like I didn't think anybody cared about that, but I made a joke about it in my Facebook group. Like, when you're doing a four-way scene and you have so many people involved, you have to, like, try to, like, diagram it on a sticky note. Like, and then, like, and let's just say the stickies were like the stick figures were anatomically correct. Um, and so, like, people were like, we need to see that sticky. And I'm like, I'm definitely not putting that up on Facebook. I'm like, but I'll put it up in Patreon. And so, like, people went over to Patreon to look at that. Like, there's really nothing that people won't pay to see if you just give them what they want. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so key. What when you find that thing that you really enjoy and the thing that you love, and you're coming from that place of this is exciting to me. This is so much like so exciting and so interesting to me. You're doing it from like a completely different level, different energy level than anytime you're doing
yes,
something because you number one think you have to or think you're trying to
right.
chase a dollar or when you're I don't even know burnt out but you're trying one more thing. It's a completely
Yeah,
different animal and energy, and so those people notice it, they come to you, and you're more like a magnet when you are operating from that place.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You just have to shift your mindset. And I think this is the biggest problem I have, like, to get past with other authors, is like, you have to stop being grateful for every sale like you didn't earn the money.
Right.
You have to stop being like, oh, thank you for wasting your time on me, like in this weird sort of, like, masochistic, like
Right.
energy of,
Yeah.
like, like, I don't deserve the sale, or I didn't work hard enough for it. I didn't, like, we've gotten to a point where we're like, people are so into this, like, a book a day, like, I want you to write a book every single month, like mass market, like, people are consuming things so quickly
Yep.
that we get to a point where there's so many options. We think, oh well, they chose me, like, so I should be grateful because they could have picked XYZ, you know what I mean? And you just have to kind of stop thinking about it in terms of like a popularity contest or like whatever. Like if you write a book and it's good and they like it, they will come back for more. Like it just is what it is, you know? Like I said, a lot of people used to say, "Oh, well you got lucky because that girl found you on TikTok and your series blew up." But if she had found me on TikTok and she hated the book, my series wouldn't have blown up. If I didn't
Yeah.
write a good book, it wouldn't have mattered who found me.
Right.
Like, so you have to look at it that way. Like, yes, luck definitely played its part, but if I hadn't done my job, I still wouldn't be anywhere, whether she found the book or not. Like if Oprah found the book and it sucked, she would have just thrown it away and it would have been that would have been it. Like, you know
Right.
what I mean? It doesn't matter who finds your stuff if it's not up to par. But at the same time, you have to stop acting like every sale is a miracle. Like it's not. It's
Right.
what's supposed to happen. You write a book and people like it and then they buy more of your
Yes.
books. Like that's just
Yes.
how the world works. Like
I think that
it's
was one of the things that kind of blew my mind when I first started listening to Amanda Francis, because she was talking like, because I was still in that place where it's just like very tentative with sales. And she was like, people love to pay me. Like that is her like base, like operating system.
yep,
People love to pay me.
yep.
People pay me because they love what I'm doing. I have something to say and they need it and they love to pay me. And I'm like, oh yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. People go to the movies to be entertained. They pay
Yeah.
11 to $15 a ticket to be entertained.
And then
I write
$25
books
on other
to
stuff.
yeah, exactly. And
Concessions.
I write books too, but it's kind of the same thing because what happens? People come to me, they read my books, right? Then they get my
Yeah.
merch, right? So that's like the concession stand. And then they join
Yep.
my Patreon, and that's like the subscription service. You know what I mean? That's like the Netflix of it
Yeah.
all. Like, but if they weren't entertained, it wouldn't be worth it to them. They're getting something out of it, just like you are. It's not a one-sided exchange. Like you don't need to be grateful for like every sale like somebody's doing you a favor that you're deserve to make money doing this, you know.
Yes.
The whole starving artist thing is a myth. Like
I
it's a
agree.
myth. Like you don't have to suffer for your art, you just
No, you just
don't.
need to decide you're worth it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't feel guilty about what I charge for my books. I don't feel guilty for having merch. I don't feel guilty for having a Patreon that's successful, and I won't feel guilty about that. I don't
Heck
feel
yeah.
guilty for what I charge for my ebooks. Like I work really hard at what I do. Like I work 10 to 15 hours a day at this. Like, you
Right.
know, like I
Right. You are
deserve
nonstop
to
on the
make the
go.
money that I make,
Yes. And
you
I
know?
think when authors hear that, there's going to definitely be people that are like, holy cow, she is really confident. But this is exactly the thing that I've been talking about on the podcast for I don't even know how long now, where we have to be
Yeah,
confident in ourselves enough to know that we are worth this thing. And if anytime you hold like that jealousy thing or that feeling of like, who does she think she is? That's actually
yeah,
just you going, hey, I wish I had that thing. I don't. And so
yeah.
therefore I'm going to put blame on them. That's that's keeping you stuck. So you got to let that go, drop that shit and like realize
Yeah,
that you want it too.
and I get that a lot. I've hit a certain point in my career where I'm now seeing how easily people turn on you when you get to a certain point in your career. Um,
Sure.
and a lot of people are really angry at how I run my business and that I'm successful at what I do. Like they really are. Like they think I charge too much. They think that I literally had somebody come to me for help. It's so wild. Somebody came to me for help and for with Patreon and with marketing, and we had a whole 90-minute conversation. And at the end of it, I was like, you know, if I can make this work, anybody can make this work. And she said, yeah, I've read your books. I really don't get what all the hype is. Like she's like, I don't she's like, they're all right, but I really don't think they're anything special. And I was like, all right, all right,
Well,
all right.
that was humbling. Thanks, I guess.
Thank you, I guess. I mean, all right. But I mean, and I'm sure like to a lot of people she's right. Like, but but I don't write the books for them. I write the books for me. And I'm lucky that a bunch of other people wanted to read the stuff that I wanted to write. But like a lot of people have that whole thing like I don't get why you're successful and I'm not.
Yep.
And it's like it's because I went in knowing I was going to be successful. Like
Yes.
it's because I I made a deal with myself that I wasn't going to settle for one, and that I wasn't going to apologize, and I wasn't going to say that I don't deserve this, or that I didn't do enough to earn it, or like I have all this baggage from like, like low self-esteem stuff. Like I put it all aside and I was just like, no, like I'm a good writer. This is going to take off. This is going to work, and it has to work because I'm not going to accept anything less. And people can't get past that. A lot of people cannot see that all the excuses they make and all the stuff like that, like everybody's always like, oh no, it's not my fault Amazon did this, or it's not my fault this happened. And it's not really a matter of fault, it's a matter of mindset. You know,
Yes.
when you go in and you believe that you can't do it before you've even tried, you're never going to get past that. You're always going to be waiting for the other shoe to drop of like the next disaster to befall you. And
Right.
then that's all you ever see. That's all you ever see is the bad stuff. You never see the good stuff. And you and I have had this conversation where sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if this is working. And you're just like, no, keep going. You're like mid manifestation. Like, this is actually
Yes.
happening for you. Because sometimes you do start to go, okay, well, there's some bad things happening. So maybe I'm not believing hard enough, or maybe I'm not doing enough, or maybe I'm not seeing enough, and you have to just realize that even though bad stuff happens, it's not all bad stuff. Like the universe doesn't just change its mind and like you're just like, you know, like
Right.
like the world is still turning. Like just because bad things are happening doesn't mean your manifestation isn't working. It just
Right.
means that the world is doing what the world does, and you just have to keep going. If you're going through hell, keep going. Just keep
Well,
going through your manifestation, and you will get to the other side of
exactly. Well, and Abraham Hicks talks a lot about like how we don't live in an assertion world. Like there is no
it.
such thing as assertion. So when shit goes wrong, it's typically because you have something in your frequency, your vibration that's
Yep.
allowing it in. And as long as you clean up that vibration, it goes away, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has those thoughts that'll creep back in because we have wiring that maybe we've like fed over the years. And so every
Yeah.
once in a while, a fear will crop up or a thought will crop up where you're like, oh, but as long as you just
Yeah.
go, that's nothing, let it go and keep
Yeah.
reframing, you're just going to keep doing better and better.
Yeah. And sometimes I have to like sit down and I have to look at where I started and I have to look at where I am now. And I have to be like, is this as far as I want to go with this? Or is it like I have to appreciate where I'm at now? Because like whenever I hit my next goal, I kind of tend to just go, okay, well that was great, but like it's not this goal. Like so I'm
Yes.
always like chasing the next goal. And sometimes I forget to stop and go, holy shit. Like when I
Same.
saw what I made, last year, I actually thought it was an accident. I thought it was a mistake. I called my accountant and I was like, I think you made an error. And she's like, you're gonna wish I made an error when you see how much you owe in taxes, but I swear to you, I didn't. And I was just like, well, okay, great, but also great. But like, like I get so into the small little details that sometimes I forget to step back and be like, wow, like holy hell, like I can't believe how far I've come from 2 years ago. Like, so there's a lot that goes into your mindset. Like you're not always just like happy go lucky and just like everything works out for me. Like
Right.
you're a human being and you have your doubts, but you have to kind of like stop and like you said, reframe like what's happening. And I will like put on like some vibrational music to try to like elevate where I'm at. I'll read Abraham Hicks, or I'll do stuff to try to like get myself back into the no girl, you're fine, kind of like
Yeah.
this is all happening for a reason. This is all like, and I've done it in my business life and now I'm trying to do it in my personal life as far as my health and stuff like that. But it's
Good.
like shifting that mindset. So it was such a huge thing for me that I can literally tell you like the minute it happened. Like I had done a spell and I had sat with it for an entire day. I let the whole candle burn out. And I woke up the next morning and it was like I was a different person. People always
Wow.
say like, "Oh, I woke up in my best timeline" or whatever. Like it
Yeah.
kind of felt like that's what happened. I was so convicted in that no, I'm quitting my job. Like it's happening. That I just woke up and I had felt like a whole burden had just been lifted off of me. And it was because I was just so certain that this is exactly what was meant to happen. And even when things went wrong at every turn for the first year, I was like, no, no, like I had to remember that feeling of like, no, 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 this is exactly what was supposed to happen. I just have to keep believing and keep going. Like, and that's the hard part is when
Yeah,
things go wrong, still keeping going.
for
Like that's
sure.
the biggest problem is like getting past your own bullshit, you
Yep.
know?
Yeah, and we have a lot of it.
We have
Especially if
so
you've
much
been
of
on
it.
this planet for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of baggage that we are all carried around. Like
Right?
we're all trying to overcome generational trauma and like,
Right?
like
We're being the
we're
ones
all
that
dealing with the
it
stuff our parents gave us.
yes, and it ends with us. It is done.
Exactly. We're all done. As a generation, we're in the age of Aquarius, and I think that like every single person I know is in therapy. Every single person I know is trying to do better for their children. You know what I mean? Like we're all trying
Yep.
to like shake off like the boomer like generation, like because my parents were boomers, like
Yep.
trying to shake off this whole thing and be better people. And I think that that's what the age of Aquarius was always trying to tell us is that we have to go through the bad to get to the enlightenment that's supposed to come from this, and like
Yeah.
wait for the dinosaurs to die off and like, for
Yeah.
the collective good to like happen. But
Yeah.
like some of us are just getting there a little faster than others.
I
Like
agree. Yeah.
and I think that we're realizing that manifestation is a real thing, that higher energies and vibrations are a real thing. Like even scientists are realizing that now. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah. Yeah. Quantum
Like there's
physicists
entire
all
fields,
over.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's fields built around this. Like, and we just have to kind of just realize it's not, it's not a myth. It's real. We just have to figure out how to tap into it.
Yeah, because it's like any other scientific find was magic until they could put a label
Yep,
on it. So
exactly.
it's just us trying to figure out how this works, figuring out how we go about creating the reality that we want and deciding that it's ours. I
Yep.
think that's so key. Is there anything else when it comes to Patreon that you think authors who are like looking at it should know before we end the podcast interview today?
I mean, one, make peace with the fees that you're going to pay. Um,
Right. Well, it gets
uh,
taken out of the
they make
payments,
it
right? Yeah.
Yeah, they make it as easy as possible for everybody. And
Yes.
that comes at a price. You know what I mean? Like you're paying for the ease of merch being sent out without you and being created without you. You're paying for the ease of the platform use. Um, and I've looked at other platforms and none of them have it as together as Patreon does. So for me, it's well worth it. Um, and but like it is a kick every month when you're like, oh, I made $16,000. No, I made $9,000. What the hell? Like, you know
Sure,
what I mean?
sure.
So so there is like a little bit of a gut punch in it, like where you're just like, oh, like, but also you didn't have made any of that without Patreon.
Right.
Um, so like for that with your success, you're going to see bigger pieces of your pie kind of disappearing, but
Sure.
that's a good thing because that means you're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Um,
Yeah.
and really, I would say if you're not sure about where to start slow. Maybe just have two tiers, a $5 and a $10 tier, a $1 and a $3 tier, depending on what kind of time and effort you want to put into your Patreon. Like if you want to just offer everybody one chapter a week of your work in progress, great. If you want to just offer one mini fic, do it like $1 or $3 tier, and then just offer something small that you feel that you can commit to time wise, whether that's once a month or once every other week or whatever. Because it's more about consistency and
Yeah.
giving them what you promised them than it is necessarily the type of content you promised them. And as you see that growth, try to find ways to like make more value for each tier. And if you want your Patreon to be something big and exclusive, start putting content aside before you start really pushing to bring people in so that you don't have to do everything in the moment and you're kind of proactive. That's what I tell people, like like I was telling you, Lucy Lennox had asked me about Patreon. I was like, get as much content created up front before you even launch a Patreon, and you'll be so much more ahead of the game and feel less stressed about it. That's not who I am as a person.
Right.
I like to be stressed out. It's just like, I don't know, it's my kryptonite. It's like what I personally do to like get high is panic. Um, like,
Oh,
so I
jeepers.
like to just constantly feel like I am not accomplishing what I need to do. But people who are smart and people who are proactive, they will do this stuff in advance so that they don't, have their cortisol levels in the thousands.
Right.
Um, so that is what my real advice would be, is to be as proactive as possible, have some content set up in advance. Even you can schedule it so you can just set it and
Yes.
forget it. Like, so if you have a month's worth of content ready to go, put it all up pre-scheduled and you don't have to think about it again. You can always be working on the next month's content.
Yep.
Um, and again, consistency is better than anything. Like, being consistent and letting people know that like you're committed to Patreon, because too many people start a Patreon and then they just abandon it. So a lot
Right.
of people don't like to spend money because we all forget to cancel those little subscriptions and then they pile up. I have like
Yeah.
9 patrons that I like subscribe to. I could probably get rid of 4 of them, but I'm too lazy to do it. Like, I never look at their content, but I'm just like, it's $5, whatever. Like, I'm too lazy to
Sure.
do it. And that's why a lot of people don't want to give that $5, because they know even if they never look at your stuff, they're never going to cancel that $5. They'll be
Right.
paying you into
Right.
their grave, because we're all too lazy. This is the same reason we don't cancel our Netflix, or we don't, like, we just don't do it. Like, so just be consistent, because then you'll get those people to subscribe and then they'll forget about you. And then you can keep their $5 until they die. Like,
Well, hopefully they don't forget about you. Hopefully they read
no.
everything that you write.
No, they definitely do. Like, you'll see the improvement, as long as you're consistent. You'll see people signing up, and again, just interact with them and give them what they want, and there's not a reason for them to not stick with you.
Right. I think that's so key too. And I think that's also one of the reasons why it was so I needed to wire in my head when I was setting up these patrons, why I wanted to pull myself away from social media, from other platforms that didn't seem like they were doing a whole lot, because I wanted to get into that routine of making sure I'm putting content out. I have 2 pen names right now. One's actually a rom-com pen name. I don't think I've told you about that. And
No,
yeah, I just started it. And then one's my urban fantasy. And so as I'm working on the rom-com side of things, I'm still over there letting them know, doing polls, posting silly memes, doing things and interacting as Carissa Andrews, so that they
right,
know I'm still here. I'm still going to be working on the next book starting in April. But in the meantime,
right.
here's these fun things. But if I would have been like still focusing solely on social media instead of using Patreon as my social platform, it would have been so much harder to remember to go there. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's the yeah, and that's the thing. Like, Twitter to me is like screaming into a void.
Yeah,
It's
right.
absolutely useless. I have a Twitter and people will interact with me on Twitter, but I don't actively interact with anybody unless they at me.
Same.
Because there's no reason for it. If you're not a 3 million plus subscriber, like, nobody sees your content, nobody interacts with your content, and that's fine. Because Twitter is actually like really mean. And like, they cancel people every 5 minutes, and I don't want to be canceled. So I'm fine with it. It's the same reason why my TikTok, I don't really actively try to blow up my TikTok. I post consistently, or my social media person does. Um, but I don't want my videos going viral. I don't want to like get 9 million like views on any one thing, because that is how you get negative attention.
Mm,
I would rather people consistently see my videos on their feed and just go, "Oh, that's cool," and have that name recognition of
yeah.
like, "Oh, only James, I know that person," than have like a video go viral that doesn't lead to anything good. But you know what I mean? Because I would
Yeah.
rather have consistently be in people's feeds and get that name recognition than have one video go viral that really just kind of blows up and then goes away. Like, that doesn't
Yep.
that doesn't really create any kind of like, especially since the only videos that ever seem to go viral are there one video that has nothing to do with your books.
Right. What
You
is
know,
that?
every author has that happen. They're like, oh, consistent with their books, and then they do something about like something ridiculous that has nothing to do with their books, and that's the one that blows up. And then they're like, well, that didn't help me in any way at all.
Right. Or
You
they
know?
misspelled something and everyone's freaking out about the misspelling and that's it.
Yes, exactly. It's always something. It's always something. So it's like, to me, I would rather, like, I don't want to get rid of TikTok. I don't want to get rid of, Instagram. Instagram especially, that works really well for me. Um, I want people to be able to see my name and see my trailers and see my book titles and my covers because I want that recognition when they go into Barnes and Noble and they see like one of my books. They'll be like, "Hey, I saw that on TikTok or whatever," and they
Yeah.
might be curious enough to pick it up. But like, I don't go to TikTok to look at book stuff. I am not even remotely on Book Talk. Like, I don't look at books because to me it's like it's like I don't know, it's like being a gynecologist. Like you just don't want to look at another one when you get home, like that kind of thing. Like I am so booked out by the time I get home that if somebody even says the word book, my eye twitches. I'm just like, okay. Um, so people are like, "What are you reading?" I'm like, "Not a damn thing. I am watching television."
I am
Sorry, like
rereading all the shit that I've just written today. Yes.
exactly because you're just constantly in that mindset.
Yep.
So sometimes I just need a break. Like so, I just I want the recognition, but if you can use Patreon as your social media and you can constantly be bringing people to Patreon, there's no downside to that,
I
you
agree.
know?
I agree. I mean, even if you're only earning a couple of dollars and you're still going to want to post things anyway, you're still going to want to explain what's happening or share the cover reveals or whatever. And so why not do it
Well,
on a platform where you could earn a couple of dollars?
listen, even when I was like just starting my Patreon and I had like consistently 32, that was still like $300 a month I was bringing in. And it felt like so much money, like $300. That was
Yeah.
gas and food. Like I had no money when I started this because I was living off my 401k because I was convicted that this is the right path, but I was also broke as hell. Like I
Right.
was destitute. Like so that $300 was saving me. It felt like $1 million. Like that's still a lot, you know. Like you can't kind of see that like oh you only have 32 patrons or whatever. Like that's
Yeah.
still a lot of money. That's still 32 people who believe in you enough to want to buy you a cup of coffee every week. Like you
Yeah.
know so like everything is worth it. Everything is worth it and it can only go up, you know?
I agree. I think it's such a valuable platform, and it's one that I since starting it, like on all the different. So I run three of them. I run one for Author Revolution's podcast, and then I have the two pen names, and it's just been such a fun experience interacting with it, playing around with how it works. It's almost made social media fun for me again, where I felt
Yep.
like after years and years and years of doing it, you just kind of go, you know,
Yeah. Well, because
yeah,
especially on Instagram and TikTok, like it's really easy to see it's not working. Like, you know what I mean?
right,
And that's really disheartening. Like,
yeah,
like
right,
it's like, oh, I got 3 likes on this post. Great. Like, and you kind of just feel really bad. Whereas like with Patreon, like if you get any interaction, it could be from like 7,000 people seeing that post, or it could be from seven and you don't know. So it's like it's a little bit of like a thing like, hey, somebody liked it versus like, oh, only one person liked it. You know, it's just like
right.
it's a weird game you play with yourself, but it's like it's not as instantly disheartening like when something because a lot of times with Instagram and TikTok, it's not you. It's you're being hidden. Like you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like you're
Yep. The
shadow banned and you
algorithms are
don't
doing
know
it.
it. The algorithm is messing with you. Like you just don't know, especially with somebody like me who does like LGBT content. Like a lot
Yeah.
of times on TikTok, they will shadow ban you and you wouldn't even know it. Like you
Yep.
don't even know that you're not being seen. Um,
Right.
so like Patreon doesn't have that. The only drawback to Patreon is if you have 18 plus content, people cannot search your name.
Okay.
So that's why it's important to have your links everywhere for your Patreon
Right.
because they cannot just go and search only James and Patreon. I am invisible unless you have the actual link to my Patreon.
Or search
So
you specifically, because I know for when I was pulling you up, when I was creating like the questions to talk to you about, I was looking at it and I literally just searched only James Patreon and that your link comes up anyway. So but apparently you can't do it in the platform itself.
correct. You could search it like in Google for sure. You can
Yeah.
type like only James Patreon and it'll pop up. But you can't go on to Patreon and search my name. You won't
Ah,
find me. And
okay.
anybody who does 18 plus content, which is most of us who write romance of any
Yep.
kind or plan on putting any kind of spicy content on there, like that is the only drawback I find to Patreon is that they can't just search your name. You have to like give them the whole link, patreon.com/onlyjames kind of thing. And
Right.
then they can find you but that's my only drawback. But it's also safer for kids, and I would much rather it be safer for kids than and have it be an extra step for people looking for me. You
Yep.
know,
For sure.
like obviously. So that's
Well,
that's the only bad thing.
where can my audience find you? Obviously, Patreon is a great place, but where can they find you, your books, and all the good things that you do? Like, where's the best place to locate you?
The easiest place to find me, I mean, you could put my name in Google, obviously, like you did, and you'll
Right.
probably find me everywhere. But my link tree, linktr.ee/only James is the best way to find me. Like all of my links and everything are on there.
Perfect.
Um, my merch store, everything. You can find pretty much anything you need to know about me or where to find me on my link tree.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that that is in the show notes as well, so that if anyone's looking for it, they can just go to the show notes and grab it right there. Cool. Well,
Yeah,
Only, thank you
it's
so
easier.
much for being here and talking about Patreon and how your mindset really shifted in order to help you with your success, because I think that's just one more example of how it is so important, to do that. And hopefully everyone who's listening goes, whether it's Patreon, whether it's Kickstarter, whether you decide you're just going to go with, Amazon or whatever, having the right mindset is so key and critical to your success. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Oh, thank you for having me, as always.